the difference between how I feel now than earlier this year is when I have days like that come up again, I'm not going to see it as a failure, because I know that there's always going to be things that are going to come up in our lives and happen. And it's going to be an opportunity for us to kind of, dig a little deeper and try to give some more attention to those things. But it's not always something we can plan for. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. It's not always something you can plan for, but really being able to have people in your circle and in your corner who you can go to and like talk with and have those resources, I think makes such a difference.
And I think that there's a few things that you mentioned that I want to kind of focus on. So the first one is, I think that one of the most important keys is that you had a foundation of a self-care. You had a lot of self-knowledge, you had a lot of experience, and that experience comes from learning from your mistakes, learning from your the challenges in that. And I think that there's a lot of times, I don't know if you've experienced this. I'll tell you my experience, and you can validate if it's yours. But in the past, every time I would experience a mood swing, I felt like it was failure. I felt like I had somehow failed, and I really struggled with it, and it just felt like it was validating this, the worthlessness that I felt, the weakness that I felt, the victimization that I felt from this disorder. And once I started learning that I could learn from the experiences, it changed my point of view. It changed my perspective on it. And over time, I started like learning when I experienced a mood swing, like, okay, did I trigger that? Was there something that I did that triggered that? And if we can identify the trigger, then maybe I can either eliminate it or manage it better. So just over time, I started learning, recognizing it's important to learn from these things, not beat myself up for it, because some of it you don't have any control over, but some of it you can. Some things you can eliminate, some things you can identify as triggers and work through them with a therapist, or eliminate them by just removing them from your life, or those kinds of things. So how do you, I mean, is that been your experience as well? Did you used to feel like you were failing when you experienced mood swings, or what was your experience with that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question because I definitely felt this, especially this year, right? So like one of the biggest events like that I didn't expect was like this whole like chaotic situation at a prior workplace that was very toxic, like very like just sexual harassment, like but not
Yeah.
a good scenario. And that really reminded me. And I thought that, hearing you talk about, okay, like all the work that you've done, the tools, and being reminded of where you thought you did the work in. Like I thought I
Yeah.
was over. It's like, why am I being like made? Like why am I feeling similar feelings of how I felt from like a different experience that is completely unrelated? And I started to realize that there's things that will come up, and it happens in relationships too. Like having a friendships who are saying, oh well, this happened, or what are we going to do, or like putting you down and reminding, and just made me feel how I felt in prior friendships of like
Yeah.
doing that. So I feel like there's things that are always going to remind us, and especially like you're saying, identify the trigger. So why is that so upsetting? Why is that
Yeah.
so hurtful? So like getting to that root of it. And I started to realize for me, like I felt a certain way is because for me, when I was younger and I had like certain events happening to me, feeling unheard, unseen, it doesn't matter, just like push past it, let it go, whatever. And having that kind of like resurfacing, and then
Yeah.
starting to, like the way that it impacted me with when you're talking about like the mood swing was feeling, because I'm with my diagnosis, so like every like one can be a little bit different, but my diagnosis is bipolar 1, so I'm predominantly more, I've always been more on like the manic side. I would say I had that big period of depression from like 15, 16, 17, 18, but I've had more of the higher like go 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 kind of, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So it was very a lot for me to go through that, like again, like this year, like that period of depression where I isolated, I didn't want to be out, I didn't want to talk to people. It was my appetite was impacted, I couldn't eat, I couldn't like I just wasn't hungry, and it was unusual, very unusual. I didn't want to work out. I just like was, and then I would have like crying spells, and I'm just like, what? And it was so frustrating because I'm like, I've done all of this
Yeah.
work. I've had all of this progress, and this one thing happens, and it's like I'm feeling like this, and it's hard to kind of put it into words. But I remember what I did is like talking about it with obviously like my support system, so like my husband, my parents, like family, therapy, and just kind of being like, hey, here's like the situation, here's how I'm feeling around it, and then putting a plan together and like being able to get more clear on the root causes, and then luckily being able to leave a scenario like that, because I know there's many people who find themselves and like can find themselves in similar like workplace environments where whatever the situation is, where it's not good for your mental
Yeah.
health, feel like I need to stay, I can't leave because this is whatever the situation is, where it's like, this is my job, this is like, I need this money, I can't survive without it. But luckily, like I was able to have a lot of different opportunities come up, be presented, and have something that is exactly in line with what I'm doing. So I was very thankful for that, for being able to leave a scenario where it wasn't good at all. So,
Yeah.
and that was, and for me, like the other thing too that was triggering was, and it does remind me of failure. So like, but now after going through that, like it was like around April of this year. So like my birthday was also April as well as my husband. So it was kind of like, it kind of put a downer on it because I was like going through
Yeah.
all this, but also like we're still like celebrating together and stuff. But then also having those changes in friendships who, like you've grown really close with people, they know your story, they know like the work you put in, but then they still kind of use something and like kind of throw it in your face, and like don't really, like they make you feel bad rather than like trying to address it and kind of have a conversation. So it's really, again, it shows you how strong you are with being able to set those boundaries, because I feel like the universe really kind of shows you different situations of, hey, like here's where you need to put some more work in, or some more healing in, or some more of this in. And it's
Yeah.
going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. And it's going to be like, well, why do I need to do this? Why do I need to put this boundary? But it's like, because this person is not respecting it, and they're making you feel like, and I remember another friend telling me, like, being like, you're being like very extreme with this, because I'm like, I'm never going to drink again because one time it was like, you're called out, like,
Yeah.
like, what if this happens again? Like, what are we going to do? And like making you feel so bad about yourself, and then not feeling supported, even though like, like me being supportive in different ways, but then realizing like, you don't need to hold on to that. You don't need to sit there and like question it, or, always need to have the closure. Like just being able to prioritize your mental health and like
Yeah.
do it in that way. So yeah, it definitely did make me feel like earlier, but then and now I feel like the difference between how I feel now than earlier this year is when I have days like that come up again, I'm not going to see it as a failure, because I know that there's always going to be things that are going to come up in our lives and happen. And it's going to be an opportunity for us to kind of, dig a little deeper and try to give some more attention to those things. But it's not always something we can plan for. And that's
Yeah.
the thing. It's not always something you can plan for, but really being able to have people in your circle and in your corner who you can go to and like talk with and have those resources, I think makes such a difference.